Before, there were pit lane strategies calculated by supercomputers. Before there were billion-dollar teams, factory-backed engine deals, and races lit up by neon in Las Vegas. Before Netflix's Drive to Survive turned Formula One into the most talked about sport on the entire planet, there was a field of 21 cars on a bumpy track in England, a king sitting in the grandstands, and a group of men who were about to do something that had genuinely never been organized or attempted before. This is the entire history of Formula One, and I promise you, it is wilder, more dangerous, more heartbreaking, and more insane than anything you have seen in any highlights package or any racing documentary. Let's go all the way back to where it started. The year is 1950. The world has just dragged itself out of World War II. Europe is still rebuilding. Cities are still carrying the scars of the conflict. People are still trying to understand what peacetime actually feels like after 6 years of devastation. And in the middle of all of that grief and reconstruction, a group of passionate motorsport people convinced the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile to create a world championship for racing drivers. The FIA agreed, the calendar was set, and the date was chosen. May 13th, 1950. Silverstone Circuit in England. King George VI sits in the grandstand alongside Queen Elizabeth and Princess Margaret, making it the only time in history a reigning British monarch has attended a motor race. 120,000 people packed the circuit on a Saturday that would change the history of sport. And a man named Giuseppe Farina, driving a sleek Alfa Romeo, wins the race and goes on to become the sport's very first world champion before the year is out. Now here's what you need to truly understand about the cars these men were driving. No seat belts, no fire suits, no crash helmets with any real structural protection. No barriers of any meaningful kind separating the track from the spectators who were standing 10 feet away on the grass. Just hay bales, raw courage, and engines producing a noise that witnesses described as something you felt vibrating through your entire body before you even consciously heard it with your ears. These drivers were piloting front-engine machines capable of close to 200 miles per hour, wearing thin leather helmets and placing an extraordinary amount of faith in the idea that today was simply not their day to die. Because dying was a very real and very regular possibility. In the first decade of Formula One alone, 13 drivers were killed racing these cars. 13. And the sport continued, because the culture of that era was that this was simply what the sport cost. You did not question it publicly. You accepted it as one of the terms of participation. You signed up knowing exactly what the stakes were, and you hoped the numbers worked in your favor more often than not. Farina won the first championship. But the man who owned the 1950s, who made the entire decade feel like his personal property, was Juan Manuel Fangio, an Argentine who looked more like a quietly spoken schoolteacher than a racing driver. Fangio won 5 world championships between 1951 and 1957. And the detail that elevates this achievement into something almost unbelievable is the fact that he won those 5 titles with 5 completely different teams. Ferrari one year, Maserati the next, Mercedes, Alfa Romeo, back to Maserati again. 5 championships, 5 teams. In an era with almost zero testing time, no data analysis, no radio communication with engineers during a race, and virtually no infrastructure to help you adapt from one completely different car to another. He just got in the car, whatever car it happened to be that particular season, and went faster than every other human being on Earth. Consistently, year after year, on circuits that were lined with trees and stone walls and offered no protection whatsoever. His record of 5 titles stood untouched for nearly 50 years. Many respected analysts still argue today that no driver in history has extracted more consistent performance from the machinery available to them than Fangio did across his career. He was a genius in a decade that had not yet built a challenge large enough to truly test him. Then in 1958, a British team called Cooper quietly revolutionized the entire sport. They moved the engine from the front of the car to the rear, positioning it behind the driver. It sounds like a relatively minor engineering adjustment. It was not minor in any sense. The rear engine car handled differently, distributed weight differently, and was fundamentally faster through corners than anything that had come before it. Within 3 years, every single competing team in Formula One had made the exact same switch. The front engine era was permanently over. Into the 1960s, Formula One finds its first genuine superstar, Jim Clark, A Scottish farmer's son who drove for the Lotus team with a level of natural ability so rare that fellow drivers, men who were themselves exceptional talents, openly admitted having no rational explanation for what they were watching when Clark was behind the wheel. He won the championship in 1963 and again in 1965. His car control was so smooth, so precise, so apparently effortless that footage of him from those years feels less like watching a race and more like watching a mathematician solve a problem. Never ruffled, never appearing to be in danger, never looking like anything other than a man who was exactly where he belonged. In 1968, at a Formula 2 race in Hockenheim, Germany, Jim Clark's car left the track at high speed for reasons that have never been conclusively explained. He was killed instantly. He was 32 years old, and the sport continued on. But one man had reached his absolute limit with that acceptance. Jackie Stewart was a three-time world champion who had watched enough of his closest friends die that he was no longer capable of treating it as inevitable. He began fighting publicly and relentlessly for safety reforms in the late 1960s. Proper crash barriers, runoff areas at every corner, medical staff and emergency equipment at every circuit. He was called a coward by his peers, called a traitor to the soul of motorsport by the governing establishment. The hostility was real, sustained, and came from respected people whose opinions carried real weight in the sport. He kept pushing anyway, because his friends kept dying. Jackie Stewart saved more lives in Formula One than anyone else in this sport's entire history. He still does not get close to the credit he deserves for it. The 1970s. And if the 1960s were dangerous, the 70s were operating on a categorically different level. The cars were evolving at a speed that safety infrastructure simply could not match. Aerodynamic wings appeared. Then ground effect technology arrived, where the underside of the car was engineered like an inverted wing to physically suck it down onto the track surface and generate cornering speeds that engineers had been reluctant to fully predict because they did not completely believe them. Drivers were enduring G-forces through corners that would render most people unconscious, on circuits that had barely changed from the previous decade. In 1970, Jochen Rindt was killed in qualifying at Monza. He had already accumulated enough championship points that year that no one remaining in the field could mathematically beat him. He became the only posthumous world champion in the history of Formula One, a man who won the title without living to see the end of the season that produced it. Then came August 1st, 1976, the German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring. Over 14 miles of narrow, bumpy road cut through the German mountains, widely considered the most demanding and dangerous racing circuit on Earth. On the second lap, Niki Lauda's Ferrari catches fire after a collision. He is trapped inside burning wreckage for nearly 60 seconds before other drivers stop their race, run back along the circuit on foot, and drag him out. His face is badly burned. His lungs have absorbed toxic gases from the fire. A priest arrives at his hospital bedside to administer last rites because the medical team is not confident he will survive the night. 6 weeks later, Niki Lauda is back in a Formula One car. He returned in Monza, still bandaged, still healing from wounds that had not fully closed, and finished fourth. He lost the championship to James Hunt by a single point because at the finale in Japan, in monsoon conditions with almost zero visibility and standing water across the entire circuit, Lauda made the decision that the risk to his life was not worth the trophy and drove into the pits. People said he had quit at the critical moment. Lauda said he had simply decided his survival had value. He came back the following season and won the championship, because that is who Niki Lauda was. The 1980s. Turbocharged engines producing over 1,000 horsepower in qualifying, in cars weighing around 500 kilograms, speeds that pushed against the limits of what physics suggested should be achievable. And the defining story of the decade was not the machinery. It was two men, Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna, teammates at McLaren, the greatest rivalry this sport has ever produced and will almost certainly ever produce again. In 1988, McLaren won 15 of 16 races. The rest of the field was competing among itself for third place. Senna and Prost split the victories and the title went to Senna by the absolute minimum margin. In 1989 at the Japanese Grand Prix, they collided at the chicane. Both retired. Prost won the championship. In 1990 at the same track at the same corner on the very first lap of the race, Senna drove into Prost's car deliberately, as he later acknowledged. Senna won the championship. Their rivalry was not just competition. It was two fundamentally different philosophies of what it means to want to win more than anything else in the world, constantly fighting each other on track and off it across multiple seasons. Prost was calculated, precise, and patient. Senna operated from a place closer to absolute conviction than rational decision-making. Both were extraordinary. The sport has been searching for that intensity between two people ever since, and has not found it. Turbos were banned after 1988. Williams dominated the early 90s. Senna moved there for 1994. Then came May 1st, 1994. Imola. Roland Ratzenberger had been killed in qualifying the day before. On lap 7 of the race, Senna's car went straight at the Tamburello corner and hit the concrete wall. He died that afternoon from a head injury sustained at the moment of impact. Brazil declared 3 days of national mourning. 3 million people lined the streets of São Paulo for his funeral procession. Formula One had lost drivers before, but Senna's death felt categorically different. He was the emotional center of gravity around which the entire sport had been revolving, and his death finally, permanently triggered the safety revolution that had been demanded for decades. Circuits completely rebuilt, cars redesigned around survival, medical procedures transformed. The sport took its responsibility to the people inside those cars seriously in a way it never had before. After Senna's death, a new rivalry formed through the late 1990s that gave the sport something to compete for again. Mika Häkkinen of Finland, quiet and relentlessly fast, challenged Schumacher for the title in 1998 and 1999, in battles so close that entire seasons came down to the final corners of the final race. Their mutual respect and fierce competition gave a grieving sport a reason to invest emotionally again. Häkkinen won both championships. Schumacher's response was to go back to Ferrari, redouble his preparation, and return in 2000 so comprehensively dominant that the question was no longer whether he would win, but by how much. And from that darkness, Michael Schumacher built the next great era. 2 titles with Benetton in 1994 and 1995, then to Ferrari, a team that had not won a driver's championship since 1979. He rebuilt them from the inside out. What made Schumacher so different was not just the winning. It was the obsessive, relentless professionalism he brought to every single day. He arrived at the factory before his engineers. He stayed after they left. He understood the aerodynamics of his car at a level that made his mechanics uncomfortable. He shaped Ferrari not just as a driver, but as an institution. From 2000 to 2004, Schumacher and Ferrari won everything. 5 consecutive drivers and constructors championships. In 2002, he podiumed in every single race of the season. In 2004, he won 13 of 18 races. He broke Fangio's 50-year record and finished with 7 titles in total. It looked permanent, until Lewis Hamilton made it feel temporary. The 2014 hybrid era brought turbocharged, energy-recovering power units of extraordinary complexity. Mercedes dominated. Hamilton won 6 championships in 7 seasons. What separated Hamilton was not simply the speed. It was the longevity. It was the ability to remain elite across different regulations, different teammates, different versions of himself, and different eras of the sport. He broke every meaningful record Schumacher held. He pushed Formula One to confront its own lack of diversity in a direct and personal way. He made the sport feel relevant to audiences who had previously found the whole enterprise sealed off and inaccessible. And he kept winning. He equaled Schumacher's 7 titles in 2020 in stadiums that sat completely empty during a global pandemic. Then Drive to Survive arrived on Netflix in 2019, and Formula One changed overnight in ways no broadcast deal or marketing campaign had managed in 7 decades. New fans arrived by the millions. Miami got a Grand Prix. Las Vegas got a Grand Prix. The American audience the sport had chased for 50 years finally showed up all at once. The hybrid era also produced a new generation of drivers as global celebrities. Daniel Ricciardo built a fan base that crossed every demographic boundary the sport had traditionally struggled to reach. Lando Norris became a genuine social media phenomenon. The drivers were no longer just athletes inside expensive cars. They were personalities with their own identities, their own platforms, reaching audiences that the sport itself could never have access through traditional broadcasting alone. And Max Verstappen stepped into the biggest spotlight the sport had ever generated. He debuted at 17, the youngest driver in Formula One history at the time. His first championship came on the final lap of the final race of 2021. Under circumstances so disputed, The race director lost his position in the weeks that followed. He won 3 more championships after that without requiring any controversy. 4 consecutive titles. What Verstappen also brought back was genuine polarizing debate. The fierce arguments about his driving, the loyalty of his fan base, the tension with Hamilton across an entire season. Formula One had not had a figure this divisive at the center of the sport since Schumacher at his most dominant. And divisive in a sport that depends on people caring enough to argue about it is exactly what keeps the audience coming back season after season. New technical regulations arrive in 2026 and will change the cars entirely once again. New teams are coming. New rivalries are forming in the junior categories right now. The 2026 regulations are the biggest technical change Formula One has seen in over a decade. New power unit architecture, new aerodynamic philosophy, new opportunities for teams that have been chasing the front runners for years to suddenly close the gap in a single development cycle. That is how Formula One has always worked. The rules change, the order reshuffles, and someone new gets their chance to become the next name on the list of legends. From 21 cars at Silverstone in 1950 with the King in the grandstand and hay bales lining the track, to the most commercially successful and globally watched annual motor racing series in history, 75 years. And not even close to finished. That is the entire history of Formula One.